Amsterdam Time Machine, and actually the Amsterdam Time Machine is various different projects, and I'll be focusing on one of the pilot projects funded by CLARIAH. I'll also explain a little bit about CLARIAH, and that is just a pilot project to see how it was going. I'll explain the context as well, and the things we've been doing, and also how this works, because it's not an easy project, and it's not easy to do interdisciplinary work, but it's extremely rewarding, and I hope these examples will inspire you to also set up your own time machines. I know there are initiatives ongoing here. The Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Dutch Royal Academy, has 16 research institutes. I guess the Austrian Academy of Sciences also has research institutes. Several of those institutes are focused on humanities research, and 3 of those institutes form the humanities cluster. So about 3 years ago, they decided to, whilst keeping the individual institutes going, because there's extremely nice research going on there, at the Huygens ING, which is focused on history, literary studies, and history of science and scholarship, the International Institute for Social History, which is focused on social history, and the Emeritus Institute, which might be the least familiar to you, which focuses on Dutch language and culture. So they each have very distinct research profiles, but they also share a lot of things. So especially around digital methods, we thought this is something where we can really combine forces. So in 2017, the Digital Humanities Lab was started, my research group, and we were the first research group that is part of all 3 institutes, and we really try to connect across the different institutes by shared methodologies. We find, for example, that geographical information systems are quite important to all 3 research domains. Network analysis is another one, text analysis is another one, so we can really use each other's expertise there, but also enrich each other's use cases by sharing the information. Then a little bit about CLARIAH. There are CLARIAH initiatives starting elsewhere as well. We're also working on a Benelux one, but we started in the Netherlands. And the Netherlands, the Dutch research landscape, is a bit different from here. That's why not everything that we do can probably be transported to the Austrian setting. To get from the northern point, maybe not the islands, but to get from the northern points to the most southern point in the Netherlands, it's about a 4-hour drive. Here, to get from east to west, I think it takes about 7.5 hours if you're lucky. That's what Google Maps told me. But that means that collaboration is quite easy, because it's quite easy to just pop over to each other's offices and to really physically meet. And this is one thing that is really quite important for doing this kind of thing. As was already mentioned, CLARIAH is actually a bit of a combination of Clarin and Daria. So these are European initiatives, and the Dutch branches of these decided to work together. So Clarin is focused very much on language resources, language technology, and Daria is focused on multimedia. They also do slightly different activities, so Daria does more workshops and training, and a couple of years ago we thought, hey, it might be cool to just combine these 2 into one big research project. So these are all the different partners involved in CLARIAH, quite a lot in Amsterdam, but also in the north as well as the south of the Netherlands. So we span a lot of the different research institutes, different universities. The National Library is involved as well, the Netherlands Institute for Audiovisual Archives. And we also have good connections to Ghent in Belgium and other partners abroad, trying to roll this out Europe-wide if funding permits. And we were extremely lucky that NWO, the Dutch Science Foundation for CLARIAH Core, where we're now in the second project, first gave us 12.5 million euros from 2015 to 2018. And we've recently received a new grant to continue the work we started. Now, CLARIAH is very much an infrastructure project, which we have a lot of developers on the project, trying to really get the databases and get the first tools going to kickstart these kind of things, because there is quite a huge gap between developers, how they work, what they're doing, and how humanities researchers work and what they're doing, and they need to start understanding each other. And once you have a bit of infrastructure and you can show what is possible, it becomes easier to get these projects and these collaborations going. Because sometimes it's very hard to imagine what could potentially be possible if you don't know what the technology could do. We have, in CLARIAH Core, we had 3 different focus areas, so linguistics, socioeconomic history, and media studies. And in CLARIAH Plus, which started this year, we've actually added content of text. Some of that was already happening in the linguistics work package, but that was quite a broad package. So the linguistics package is also really focusing on technology for linguistics research. And our work package 6 is focusing on technology for historians, for example, or literature studies, in order to make sense of large amounts of text. So they're brought together, obviously, by a management package and an infrastructure package. These are obviously quite important. But we also wanted to not wait until all the infrastructure was done, and get the researchers involved. You have to get the researchers involved. Sometimes they were already involved in the work packages, but also a call was sent out for researchers to propose little pilot projects to do where they were using the CLARIAH technology and really test driving it to see whether we were on the right track. So they had 16 pilot projects that were just with CLARIAH, and also with 4 additional projects with the Netherlands eScience Center, where there was also an engineer or 2 from the Netherlands eScience Center involved in testing this infrastructure and further developing it. And as I already mentioned, one of the very important things is to come together. So we've had various CLARIAH events. I don't know if you can quite read it, but in the top you see, for example, one of the research pilots. This is about sports journalism and analyzing what is happening in text and how the discourse on how newspapers report on sports changes through time. So they're really analyzing huge amounts of text there. And this is the bottom picture, for example, the Dutch Audiovisual Archives in Hilversum. If you have a chance to visit them, they've got a really beautiful building and exhibitions as well, and we work together on many different projects. So they hosted an event for us last month even. That was a bit of the background, a bit of the context, but of course you were promised a presentation about the Amsterdam Time Machine. Within Amsterdam, there are many different institutes that have long-standing collaborations, and we were very lucky that we got some extra funding from CLARIAH to actually turn this into a little research project and see where we could actually bring those 3 different work packages from CLARIAH together. And if you look at these titles, they seem quite different from each other, and maybe it's hard to imagine how could these form a coherent project, right? And actually, to be true, a lot of these people had not collaborated with each other before. So within this project, we took on 3 different use cases. So one about Amsterdam dialects and sociolects, one about social mobility, and the other one about cinemas and cinema audiences, so entertainment, you could say. And I should also say here that the Amsterdam Time Machine is part of a larger consortium. So within the European Union, we try to get this time machine off the ground. So here's our team, and there are in this team people who really know a lot about geographical information systems, media studies, linguistics, semantic web, and also some about user interfaces. And basically, this is where we started. This was our before picture. On the left-hand side, you see the linguistics use case. So there was basically a map that said that Amsterdam had 19 dialects at some point in time. We have audio archives actually at the Meertens Institute, and luckily they've been digitized. Then for the social mobility use case, we have tax registers, and we have all sorts of information about movies that played in cinemas in Amsterdam for the media studies package. And this is basically what we have afterwards. It's all in one website, and now I'm going to tell you how we got to this, because there's quite a few steps involved. If you've ever attended any talk about semantic web or linked data, then this picture might be familiar, because this is sort of the picture about the semantic web. If you haven't, don't worry about it. But this is kind of technology that underlies also a lot of things on the World Wide Web, so which you are probably using every day. Now, every bubble in this picture, and this is even a cutout, there's more bubbles on all sides, represents a data set. But these data sets don't just float in the void, but they're connected, and those are the black little lines between the two data sets. Now, the different colors mean that it's a data set in a particular domain, for example, in the life sciences, or it's a library data set, or it's a more generic data set. But if these data sets talk about the same thing, so describe the same object, and they have said, well, this object, for example, Amsterdam, in this data set that describes the geography of Amsterdam, this entity Amsterdam is the same as this entity Amsterdam in this data set about population, then you see a link in these two. And because the data sets are maybe not living in the same database, but they are connected through a data model that expressed, hey, we are talking about the same thing, and you have a little bit of information here, and I have complementary information there. When you combine them, you can do smarter queries, and that's basically what we're trying to do here with the time machine, with a focus on Amsterdam. So zooming out, or zooming in a little bit, you could say, we've collected these data sets concerning Amsterdam that all follow the same kind of formatting convention, so that they can talk to each other. In the Amsterdam linked data cloud. So these are not all of the data sets, we're still working on it, but this is a snapshot that tells you that there are different data sets that have something to do with Amsterdam, and they're somehow connected. Now, one of the important things here is the HISGIS, the historical GIS, historical geographical information systems, that really tells us how to connect maps through time. If you have any question, please raise your hand if anything is unclear, by the way. Now, what is in that HISGIS data set? Most places change over time. I think you can say that pretty much every city will change over time. If you've ever been to Amsterdam and you've maybe arrived via the central station, you've got a big street leading out from the central station. Well, in the 16th century, that used to be a canal. So on those old maps, that is water, and now it's a street, and it's lined with shops. Other canals have been maybe opened up or closed up again. Of course, the city has expanded. Street names have changed. Not all those maps are drawn from the same perspective. Also, being Dutch, by the way, we like to reclaim land from the sea. So also we've grown in that way. So you can't just line up those maps. But that's still what we're trying to do. And this is basically the picture of the Amsterdam Time Machine. And you could make a picture for the Vienna Time Machine or the Paris Time Machine or the Venice Time Machine like this. So what we try to do is we try to line up these maps, and then we try to connect information to those maps of what happened at that point in time, at that precise location. And these could be photos that were taken there. These could be paintings that were either created there. For example, we have the house where Rembrandt lived. That is now a museum, and we know that he painted particular paintings there. But those paintings were also sold to people, and we have the notary deeds that tell us who he sold it to, and we might know where this person lived. So we could also say, well, this painting was painted here, but then it hung on this wall in this house, and now it's actually in the Rijksmuseum. And also the middle layer, I don't know if you can see it, right above the map. There's, for example, a network between people. So we know from the city archives who lived where. We also know who had particular hotels or cafes. We have letters that were written. And if we can connect all of that to the right point in time and the right location, then we think we can create a richer view, and we might be able to, for a particular research question, if we bring in more data from a different domain, create stronger hypotheses about the object we're trying to research. So now back to the three little use cases in our pilot study. The first puzzle piece is the linguistics use case. So there was in 1874 a dialect encyclopedia published by Johan Winkler, and he claimed that Amsterdam at that time had 19 dialects. I don't know how familiar you are with Amsterdam, but if you look at number 19 or 18, those are pretty small dialect regions. So in this research, I mean, he went about traveling through the entirety of the Netherlands and part of Germany just to come up with these dialects. And we were wondering, were there really 19? Can we find proof of these distinct dialects in sources that remain? And of course, we don't have a physical time machine where we can zap back in time to actually go listen in the streets, whether people actually talk differently. But we do have lots of sources that have remained. We have letters, we also have dictionaries in our archives, we have historical descriptions. Actually, we also have some recordings from sort of the end of this period that he's describing, but you know, it's something, and you can actually really hear the difference between some people. Whether it's 19, we're not sure yet, even. And there was a survey. So the Meertens Institute actually does a lot of surveys, still does, into language usage, but also customs. And we did find that there are certain things that are different in, for example, Jodenhoeks. So in standard Dutch, you would say ik ga for I go, and in this dialect they would say ik gaat. So they added T to the end. So also in Haarlemmerdijks, the sort of certain sounds change. So an oi sound becomes more of an oi. And they have different words for different things. For example, so the standard Dutch word for potato is aardappel, and in Jordanees they say appies, right? So we did find some of these things. But there was another dimension to this, and that's namely sociolects. So throughout these neighborhoods, there's also posher people and less posh people. Now, certain neighborhoods were sort of deemed to be more posh, like the Kalverstraat, which is now one of the main shopping streets, not posh at all. But there's also the language of the thieves, for example, and some middle class. And could we also find some indicators for that? Now, the interesting thing about doing these digital humanities projects is that it's not just digital. There's also still a lot of handwork involved that's maybe absolutely not sexy, but definitely necessary. So we just went through all these letters that we had and all these other sources, and we selected about 8,000 data points that would say something about like an expression that was used by a particular person in a particular neighborhood or street. And we put this into a database. Now, it would have been great to do this using language technology, but even language technology already has trouble with standard Dutch. So we go back in time. Some of these sources are still handwritten. We've got beautiful, beautiful letters, but then you still have to do handwriting recognition. So for this project, it just was better to do it like this. So we just went through them. This is mostly the work of Nicolien and Christel on this project, and we created a big database, kind of fairly standard to how a lot of humanities research is being conducted. And now comes a scary picture. I'm not sure if you can read it. It's kind of small towards the end, probably. But this is the data model. And you don't have to know all the details. I'll be happy to explain it to you offline if you're interested at all. But the thing to know about this semantic web way of creating data sets is that it's not columns, it's not a table, but we try to connect things. Because if we, for example, find that the same item was used by many different people, in our sources, we don't have to create additional columns, but we can just append like a little dot to it. So this is called a graph database, and it's just a bit more flexible if you decide, hey, I want to add something. And then, of course, I was talking about connecting these bubbles. So this is a bubble in our Amsterdam Time Machine data sets. And if you think of my hand as sort of weird kind of data structure, this data model, we've got another data set, for example, about the locations, but they connect on the description of this is the location. Then you don't need to copy tables all over, but you connect them in a really handy way. I guess I lied a bit. There's another scary slide. So this is what it looks like in an XML rendering. So you can just write this down in a plain text file. It's not meant to be read by people. It's meant to be read by computers. But this is basically how you would flatten this picture into the actual data set. And this is our bubble. This is our first bubble. So this is the Amsterdam Time Machine lexicon database that we add to this cloud. Our second puzzle piece is the Amsterdam elite. So this is the use case about social mobility. Now, how do you research social mobility? Again, we don't have LinkedIn where we can easily crawl whether people actually moved on to new jobs and stuff, but we do have in the Amsterdam City Archives a lot of information about especially rich people. This is, for example, a screenshot of the electorate, so who got to vote in particular elections, and not everyone got to vote, and I think this is from 1864, or 1854, I guess. And what is interesting here is the first column is a neighborhood, the second column is a number, because we didn't have street names with numbers like we do now in Amsterdam, and actually all over the world there's different kinds of conventions for creating addresses. But we've gone through quite a few different ones in Amsterdam. And then we've got the name and the first name of the people. Where were they born? When were they born? The plaats van een aanslag is where did they pay taxes? And in this case, this was Amsterdam. And also how much did they pay in taxes? And this is actually the last four columns split out into various different taxes that they paid and a total. We also have, for a lot of these people, we know what they did for a living, what kind of job they had. And we also have connected that to information about how much status a particular job had. So it used to be, for example, that a teacher used to have a lot of status. Probably not the best paid, still not, but now they have even less status. And we actually have the historical occupations database for that. So this was also converted into RDF, which is the data format of the Semantic Web. This is a different way of writing it, so we even have different ways of writing it, but the same information same kind of information is contained in it. So that gives us our second bubble, and it's called BDV because this data set is coming from Boudien de Vries, and it's from 1884. Done with pictures? And that allows us to already plot things on a map. So where did the elite live, for example? And we can see that they didn't live so much in the eastern part, very much around the center, and also the canals, the Prinsengracht, the Keizersgracht, and I've now forgot the other one, I'm blanking out. And those are still the most expensive streets, and you also see the green dots in that band around there. But we can also look at the density of them, so it's just a different way of visualizing them. But you couldn't do that before when it was just in a database. You have to connect it to the location, so that is where the strength comes in. And we had to, for this, rewrite those neighborhoods to, well, current streets could also change, so we had to rewrite it to really geographical information points, like really points on the globe. But I'll tell you more about that in a bit. Then a third puzzle piece, it's the last use case, is the Amsterdam cinema audiences. So it's interesting to know who went to what kind of movies. And actually the concept of audience is also still under debate, or you can look at it from various perspectives. So I guess it's also interesting for marketing people. Are the people that I want to come to my movie actually coming or not? And we have a lot of information already. So Cinema Context is a database that was already created a while ago by media historians, and they have information about movies that were running in Dutch cinemas from 1896 on. And not just Amsterdam, also a lot of other towns, but Amsterdam is one of the biggest places. So we have screenings. If the movie is in the Internet Movie Database, we have a link to that, so then we automatically get the information about the actors. So we don't have to have that in our own database, but we can source it from another database. So that's the whole idea of linked data. We know about cinemas, and some cinemas were closed or got repurposed. There's a cinema, for example, in one place in Amsterdam that is now a cafe. But it's still in the database, and we know what movies were there when it was a cinema. We know about the people who were involved and some of the companies that were involved. So we converted that too, won't be a surprise, to the Cinema Context database. And this is yet another way of formatting this data, but it's all the same. And then we can sort of see where the cinemas were on the map. And you really see that they cluster in the areas that are currently also sort of the entertainment areas, where you find a lot of theaters still, especially here, those main clusters at the bottom there. But if you actually look at them differently, because we also know how big those cinemas were, so we can look at the seating capacity. It would also be nice to actually, we wanted to look into that, but we couldn't do it to see how much money they made. Because we do know that the cinemas used particular ticket pricing, so cheaper tickets for particular seats and more expensive tickets, but that was not detailed enough to say anything about that. We also know, because we know what kind of movies were there, what genres were playing in particular areas. So a lot of times movies don't have a single genre assigned to them, but it does seem that shorts are many on the outskirts popular, and adventure and action are really in the center, and well, drama is obviously the main thing here. Now, if we already start combining this, because you just kind of want to know who goes to the cinemas. Now, the cinemas just catering to the people in their neighborhood or also to other places. And it turns out very smartly that a lot of cinemas are located near tram lines. So that could be an indication that they were also catering to people from outside. As far as we know, we haven't been able to find out who was actually using these tram lines, whether they have information about that. But with every new meter of archive that gets digitized at the city archives, we find something new. So it could be that something like that will come up in the future. And then we already have the infrastructure and the groundwork ready to plug that in. But how do these really connect then? Because they are sort of three different use cases, right? I guess it won't come as a surprise that they're all related to Amsterdam. So, and I was talking in the beginning about putting these maps over each other, layering them on top of each other and connecting them. And that's basically what we're trying to do here. So this is not a separate use case, but this is where the expertise of our historical geographic information systems people comes in to how to connect these maps, because also some of the information comes from slightly different years, so you have to take that into account. And the way we did that was sit together a lot, drink a lot of coffee, use up a lot of Post-its, whiteboard space, really try to understand when we talk about a particular concept, do we mean the same thing? Because if we don't quite mean the same thing, you probably don't want to connect it to each other. It's difficult, but it's super interesting. I mean, I learned how to georeference a map, and I've never done that, and I would never think that I would actually do that when I first started out as a computational linguist. But it actually allows you to sort of understand the problems with it. So there are some issues. I already mentioned the naming conventions. Actually, in our dialect database and in our dialect encyclopedia, the authors, they defined dialect neighborhoods. But those neighborhoods have no connection to the neighborhoods that the city was using. And actually the city has used different neighborhood divisions over the years. And at some point they started using street names, but first they used to number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then 11 to 20 back. And now we do even on one side and uneven on the other side. So these things change. And also names of streets change. I mean, the spelling was not standardized at first. So we actually have some very, very talented and very hard-working developers in our consortium and also outside the consortium who have created a database of Amsterdam street names through time. So these are a bunch of street names. I hope you can see it at the back. If you can't see it, all you need to know is that this list in the middle, those are all the different name variants of what is currently known as the Jodebreestraat that we have found. So that's quite a lot, but they've actually sorted this out for at least the city center and also created these polygons. So you can see the red line there So they have encoded, well, what is known as the Jodebreestraat or any variant thereof. If you connect it to this piece of information, this piece of data, then you get this information like it used to be called this, it used to be called that. So it really tells you about the street and what it used to look like on a map. So our HistGIS experts in the project, they created a map of Amsterdam. And this is not just on street level, but it is on building level. So we have, in the historic city center, they have some ways of automating some things, but it's also a lot of handwork, very precise location points that are connected to the kadaster, so the maps of the different lots. And we have another 21,000 location points outside the city center. So for everything that we know like a particular cinema was somewhere, we can point it to this coordinate. And because we have the maps lined up, we know where on the map that coordinate is. Because also some maps were drawn not quite precisely, and on some maps certain points didn't exist yet, but because we have them lined up and we have all the points defined, we can actually match up those things. Then we need to put it all together, of course. So we've created all these RDF datasets, so we've created all these datasets in the format of the Semantic Web. And then in CLARIAH, we've created this tool called Data Legend. It still requires like a little bit of knowledge, but we really try to make this as user-friendly as possible. You can create either your own RDF out of your database, or and then also put it into a way that you can query it with some visual aids, because the Semantic Web is very, very strong conceptually. It's not quite user-friendly yet. It's very much a research object. But in CLARIAH, we try to improve on that as well as in the Time Machine. So the slides will become available. You can also go and actually download these tools or use them on the server. So we have all these data sets and we put them actually together into one way of querying them. So there's the CLARIAH pilot. We've got several other data sets that you could potentially query if you're interested. This is part of, on the one side, a little screenshot of what it looks like. The tool is called Druid. It's a semantic web database. You can add your own data set, or you can query some of the CLARIAH data sets and create data stories. Of course, there are other semantic web databases, but we've really tried to make it a little bit easier to go through with like a bit of visual aids, but it's still very much work in progress. But it has already resulted in a spin-off company, so called Shipley. So anyone who says that humanities research doesn't lead to actual companies, we've got one. I just mentioned the data stories. So this is kind of a halfway point between a demo and a static web page. This is also something that the colleagues from Work Package 3 came up with, Work Package 4. And it's kind of like presenting your results and analyses through a kind of blog post. So you can pre-cook database queries and showcase the results, but a reader can also adjust them. So here's our data story so far for the Amsterdam Time Machine. It's not quite done yet. If you go to the stories.datalegend.net website, you can actually see it. And it's just I just created a screenshot, but you see this visualization, but you see like a little blue triangle on top of it. And if you click on that, it actually shows you the database query. If you've never seen a Sparkle query, the Sparkle is the Semantic Web database query language. This can look quite intimidating. But if you get the hang of it a little bit better, and of course you already have an example query, you can just play around with the variables a little bit and showcase a different result. So that's just a little bit of how we try to bring this technology to different users with different needs, show you a little bit, a peek under the bonnet, and maybe try to get people to do this themselves. Now, as I already said, most of these people in this project had never worked together, let alone attended or well, like really sat in on each other's presentations or built a data set together. But what we can do now is that we can, for example, investigate these sociolects from a social mobility standpoint. So Jan Winkler claimed that the Kalverstraat really was the posh dialect, but does that really correspond to what we know from our census data, for example? We can look at how the different people with different status are distributed over different neighborhoods, and also see if the cinemas correspond to whether they were in the rich neighborhoods or the poor neighborhoods. This is, for example, one of the things that that actually superimposes the neighborhoods on the different areas, and the darker colored areas are more expensive, and the lighter colored areas are cheaper to live. So you sort of see them a little bit in the middle, not really in the very cheap ones, but also not really in the very expensive ones. Probably also something to do with it's expensive to have a cinema there because you, of course, need to run the thing, but also maybe those people had other forms of entertainment. That's something that we still have to find out. We're definitely not done yet. But we think that doing this, it really for us helped to look at our data, at our research methods, and at our research questions from a different perspective. When someone said, well, why don't you add this data set to it? Or what if you add this dimension? What does that give you? It would be nice to have more time slices. We definitely have plans for that. We didn't get to do that in the time that we had now. We are in various conversations with other cities to sort of get this infrastructure for Den Bosch or Utrecht or Maastricht. So, of course, it depends on how well the archives have been digitized, whether the data sets are there. Some archives, for example, got burned or flooded, or just have not been digitized yet, because that is quite expensive to do. As I said, there's already the European initiative, and who knows what comes after this. Concretely for Amsterdam, we're talking, for example, to the people who know everything about church organs and their restoration. And through the settings of the pipes, you know that certain pieces of music could not be played on those organs, and you can also make guesses about kind of what the city would have sounded like, because we know where those church organs were. And we know also sometimes what kind of pieces of music were played on them. Also information about paintings or interiors or theaters as well. We have a lot of information about that. The picture on the left middle it used to be the main police offices. Actually, it's now one of my offices. One of the Royal Academy Institutes is seated there, or two of them. It would be really cool to do something with smell. Really future thinking. And the map on the back actually tells us everything about where the prisons and all the police stations were. So that's kind of what we're working on now. I hope I gave you a little bit of an idea of what you can do when you try to connect very diverse researchers and research data sets, but through a common location and time. If you're interested, you can also see more on the website. I'll be around here for another while. And also we will have a panel at the Digital Humanities Conference in Utrecht next month. So that's also where you can meet more of the team members. Thank you so much.